So, yeah, it's not great what's going on here in this country. So I definitely recommend for people to do that. That was kind of a trip that Tracy and I had. It was our 30th anniversary trip, and it was a chance for us to go on a real adventure. And it was a real adventure. It was a long time. So it's good to be back, but it's also, again, it's sad in some ways because this country really has to heal and figure out how to come together. Because it's definitely noticeable when you're in another country and there's not the same kind of tension and the same kind of just, vibe of people being mad. So it's not healthy for us to continue like this. So I hope everyone's been healthy. I know a lot of COVID's been going around, and I know people have been fighting illness. Some people, but I think most people here are here. Our people here are coming in, and Nathan's are here, and you guys been staying healthy?
Oh, yes.
Good.
That's all we do.
Stay healthy?
Stay healthy.
Well, that's good. That's a good thing to do. Doreen is here. Doreen, how are you feeling, Doreen?
My brush.
Doreen's good.
I had COVID over.
I know you did. I talked to you when you did, but you're better now, right?
Yes.
Good. What?
Do you pick up the?
No. Doreen.
Because I'm sending a check.
Yeah, I always get the pulse when you have a flushing.
Okay. So, anyways, I hope everybody has been those who have not said anything are feeling okay. We had we had a little COVID outbreak from our party, but yours wasn't, I know. But we did get I know we got some people that got sick from there. So that was not good. But yeah, and some people are still traveling, by the way. A couple people emailed me that they weren't going to be able to be here today because they're traveling. And no, I don't know. No, there's some people who are already away. But yes, it's not a good day to travel right now. There's a lot of weather-related cancellations. Yes, and it is very cold. It's warming up in here. When I came in here, it was cold. I thought we left the heat on just a minor level on Sunday, but I guess we didn't. So it's heating up in here though. But yes.
Get married next month in New York, in Brooklyn. And I just said to
Underneath one of the tunnels. She's going to get married in the tunnel.
she's getting married.
That's a New York. That's a Chabad joke, by the way. You didn't hear about
Yeah,
the
I was going
tunnels?
to ask you about that tunnel. What's that about?
What do you mean what to it? What am I going to tell you? It ain't my tunnel. I will tell you it is. You gave people a glimpse at the factions that are actually at war with each other in Chabad. So it's an internal Chabad issue. But yes, there are different factions, and those aren't the only two factions within Chabad, but that kind of told us that there was that little incident, which became international news. It was really bad, folks, because the talk about tunnels while these people are being held in tunnels in Gaza. I know, but it really was bad because it suddenly made Jews look like we're tunnelers, like those tunnels are somewhat equal to the tunnels of Hamas. And it was very, very bad timing, and it was very bad optics. And it was not good timing. It was, I'm not happy with the Post and the other newspapers in New York that decided to blow that up and make that a story. It was not helpful. And it was sensationalist, and it was not a good thing. So it was not all around a bad thing for everybody. So And I don't think it should have been as big of a deal. There's John. John just got back. Look at John. He woke up this morning. I guess he's not that jet lagged. So today we're on chapter 43. And we have a task in front of us, which we may or may not do. If we don't do it, we don't do it. But we were actually planning on finishing today, Ezekiel. We read the last time we were here together, which was a month ago, we read the last chapters of Ezekiel, which were about the construction of a new temple. And so Ezekiel ends, and remember, Ezekiel is a priest. In addition to being a prophet, he's a priest. So he's concerned about this stuff. This is about his family and his tribe, and he's this is very relevant to him. This discussion about priest stuff. But we read about this temple that is going to be constructed by God. He's shown around this vision. And it says it's a vision from the beginning, but he's shown around by a vision, very much like the vision he had at the beginning of Ezekiel, of a copper-skinned or copper, almost a person that looks, an angel, a person or an entity that looked like they're shining like metal, and shows him these things. Today, we're picking that up, and what we're going to have is we're going to have an appearance from God, actually, not just an angel, but God. So this is some pretty heavy stuff. I'm going to show you a little. Well, when we get to it, I'll show you the background of this a little bit, what we think some of this means. Some of this we just don't know what it means. But the last thing we read about was the measurements of the walls of this temple that was going to be built. I did say this last week. This temple was never built. When the Jewish people came back under the Persian authority to rebuild the temple, they did not build a temple like this. The temple was on a much smaller scale. It was a much smaller scale even than the first temple. It was not, and they knew that. Later on, the temple was improved upon, and then during the time of King Herod took down what was there and then rebuilt an even more impressive temple. That temple was closer to what Ezekiel describes, but it's not what Ezekiel describes as far as the size and the exact, not just the dimensions, but also what was actually constructed. But it's much closer to what Ezekiel describes than what was built right after Ezekiel's time by the returnees from that first exile. Is that temple going to be rebuilt one day? Maybe. Some people hope that it will be built. It's relevant to the discussions that people have right now, because Israel has some people that are finally now in the Knesset who actually believe that this should happen. So they're very close to the leadership now. And what we're going to read about today, though, is not just the construction of the temple, but now we're going to move out and look at the way Israel as a country is going to look, which is a little different than it looked then. It's a little different than it looks now, but it is relevant because there's people who say, it says it in Ezekiel, maybe it should look like that today. And that's why I say, when I show you the map, you'll see when we get to that. So that's where we're picking up today. And so Ezekiel has seen, the last thing we saw is that we see these measurements of the temple, of the walls, of the gates. And now we're going to read about the next step, which is, as you're about to see, as Rosemary is going to take us to, right in the presence of God.
Then he led me to a gate, the gate that faced east, and there, coming from the east, with a roar like the roar of mighty waters, was the presence of the God of Israel, and the earth was lit up by that presence.
That is God. Now again, if this is in the context of a vision, he's seeing God in a vision. He's not seeing God. because the vision hasn't stopped yet. So it's still happening, at least from what he had said at the beginning, was that this was a vision. But regardless, what he sees here is the Shekhinah. Literally here, it's the kavod, the presence, which is what they, capital P, presence. But the word kavod comes from holiness, or honor, or glory. So sometimes it's translated as the glory. Mary, what does the King James say? Yeah. So glory is oftentimes the word for kavod, but it is some part of God that we see in our world that is the manifestation of God in this world. According to tradition, the kavod was in the first temple, not in the second temple. But here it appears that, like, whatever temple this is going to be, kavod of God is somewhere there, or at least is speaking to him at this moment. So in his mind, in his vision, and what he sees, the earth was lit up by the presence. So that's what it says. And he says it sounds like water. It sounds like mighty water. It sounds like a tidal wave, or some kinds of sounds of massive amounts of water, what it sounds like when it hits, when it makes that kind of noise. That's what he hears. That's what God, to him, at this moment sounds like. Is it the way God always sounds? I don't know. But right now, God sounds like crashing wave. That's what it says. Okay? So here's what he also says.
The vision was like the vision I had seen when I came to destroy the city, the very same vision that I had seen by the Chabar Canal. Forthwith, I fell on my face. The presence of God entered the temple by the gate that faced eastward.
So, presence of God, the kavod, comes into the temple. And he says right here that the last time he saw this vision, the last time this looked like this, was when he saw the destruction of the temple, which he had back a few chapters ago, when God had told him about the destruction and actually let him see it. It feels like that. It looks like that. He says that's what it was like, right? It was like that. So he reminds people, I've seen this before. This is what it was like. And so he's there in the temple with the presence of God.
A spirit carried me into the inner court, and lo, the presence of God filled the temple. And I heard speech addressed to me from the temple, though that figure was standing beside me.
Okay, so he sees God. He floats. Some spirit takes him into the inner court of the temple place, and I'll show you in a second that. And he hears something speaking to him, but it's not God now. It was the figure, and again, if you look at the note here, the guide that took him in the first place, the angel that looked like copper that we read about at the beginning of these visions. So this is what he's describing. I mean, it seems that way. Okay.
It said to me, O mortal, this is the place of my throne and the place for the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the people Israel forever. The house of Israel and their kings must not again defile my holy name by their apostasy and by the corpses of their kings at their death. When they placed their threshold next to my threshold and their doorposts next to my doorposts, with only a wall between me and them, they would defile my holy name by the abominations that they committed, and I consumed them in my anger. Therefore, let them put their apostasy and the corpses of their kings far from me, and I will dwell among them forever.
So God tells him, this is where I'm going to be. They better not screw up again like they did before. And what God seems to be really upset with is that they were worshiping other gods. They were moving away from God, and something to do with their corpses of their kings, right? So is it literally their bodies that was an issue, or is it their shrines? And by saying corpses, were they was he talking about their pagan temples that they had? Is it literally their bodies? Because it says at their death, but is it talking about something that they did either
Was there a ceremonial burial place for kings?
that's what, yes. And so like the issue is did they bury the kings near the temple? We don't have any accounts of that. They were near the temple, but they weren't on the Temple Mount. The understanding of this is traditional understanding of it is that these are, it's not that their dead bodies were there, but their sacrificial cults were there that maybe had human sacrifice with them, including, as we read about, the death of the murder of their own children. But some of the kings killed their own children, would be princes that they sacrificed. And that happened in Jerusalem. So this is what Ezekiel is being told. They better not do this again.
Now you, O mortal, describe the temple to the house of Israel, and let them measure its design. But let them be ashamed of their iniquities. When they are ashamed of all they have done, make known to them the plan of the temple and its layout, its exits and entrances, its entire plan, and all the laws and instructions pertaining to its entire plan. Write it down before their eyes, that they may faithfully follow its entire plan and all its laws.
Yeah, and again, this is the temple that we talked about. This is Ezekiel temple. So this is the temple itself. This is the altar, the inner court where he's talking to him right now. The different gateways, which based on the gateways description are immense gateways. That's why they look like this. They're not just a gate. They're much taller than the wall, which is why you see the wall and then the gate goes way higher based on the dimensions. This is based on the dimensions that we had in the last couple chapters. The kitchens in the different corners, there's 4 kitchens. This building here, which is described as a, this, I think, call it a building. This is the chambers for the Sadokim, for the Sadducees, for the priests that are descendants of Sadok. And that is, gives you an idea of how it is with regards to the size of a football field. That's how big the temple would have been. So that's 100 yards. So you can see that's a good chunk of that would be just the temple. And it's about, again, 250 yards long and wide. So there's something else. Oh, yeah, I was going to show you this. So it says right here, he's shown a vision of the third temple. The reason why it must be the third temple is because the second temple wasn't like this. So this isn't the second temple, then it's got to be the third temple. Yeah, it does look like something that was built by German architects. Somebody pointed out, yep. But it's because it's the massive scale, and it wasn't just German architects, it was Russian architects at the time. There was a time in the 30s when the idea of building was just to build as big as you could. I mean, we kind of had it too. It was when we were building skyscrapers and enormous stadiums. And when we built the Coliseum in 1930s for the 32 Olympics. And there was a time when architects pretty much just tried to build as big as you could. It was a statement of but also the linear style of it too, the kind of the Art Deco style. It was a little bit reminiscent of what you see in the 30s, but it was very linear. I mean, it was very linear because all we have from Ezekiel, that drawing of it probably is more literal than what it would have looked like, but we only have the linear dimensions, and so what it looked like as far as, you know, what kind of details or what kind of stuff it really would have looked like, we don't know. But this never got built. So these are, as far as we're concerned, this is all a blueprint. This has never existed in the world. So whatever you want to say it looked like, it's never been built. So it's all, it's somewhat based on, I guess, our imagination. So, all right. So, let's keep going. Oh,
Such are the
wait,
instructions.
yeah. Wait, did I? Oh,
You
yeah,
made it small. Can you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
you get it big
Sorry.
again?
Yeah.
Screen bar. There you go.
Yeah, there we go. It should, oh, too much stuff happening here. Okay, there we go.
Okay, I've only got a little window and I don't know whether that's you or me.
No, I think it's,
Maybe it's something I did.
does everybody see the text pretty big? I mean, we see it big, but I don't know if you guys see it
Yeah,
big.
I'm,
Okay.
I don't know, maybe it's me.
The
I can
things
still
here
see
look
it.
fine, Rosemary.
I can see it fine also.
Okay.
Okay, so it's me. Such are the instructions for the temple on top of the mountain. The entire area of its enclosure shall be most holy. Thus far, the instructions for the temple. And these are the dimensions of the altar in cubits, where each is a cubit and a handbreadth. The trench shall be a cubit deep and a cubit wide, with a rim 1 span high around its edge. And the height shall be as follows.
And again, a span is like, the span is from your, it's not a cubit. It is a, like half of that size. So
From
this
the
is the altar. This is where the sacrifices are put on.
From the trench in the ground to the lower edge, which shall be a cubit wide, 2 cubits from the lower ledge to the upper ledge, which shall likewise be a cubit wide, 4 cubits, and the height of the altar hearth shall be 4 cubits, with 4 horns projecting upward from the hearth, 4 cubits. Now the hearth shall be 12 cubits long and 12 broad, square, with 4 equal sides.
And that's a pretty big altar, because the area where the fire is, the hearth, is 12 by 12. So that means the 12 cubits by 12 cubits, which is about, you know, it's about 18 feet, 15 feet, something like that, by 15 feet. So it's a pretty big, you know, it's bigger, it needs a lot more than one person to tend to it. So I'm gonna say, it's a big undertaking, once it would be on fire. Yeah.
Hence, the upper base shall be 14 cubits broad with 4 equal sides. The surrounding rim shall be half a cubit high, and the surrounding trench shall measure 1 cubit, and the ramp shall face east. Then that figure said to me, O mortal, thus said the sovereign God, these are the directions for the altar on the day it is erected, so that burnt offerings may be offered up on it and blood dashed against it. You shall give to the Levitical priests who are of the stock of Zadok and so eligible to minister to me, declares the sovereign God, a young bull of the herd for a purgation offering. You shall take some of its blood and apply it to the 4 horns of the altar, to the 4 corners of the base, and to the surrounding rim. Thus shall you purge it and perform purification upon it. Then you shall take 1 bull of purgation offering and burn it in the designated area of the temple outside the sanctuary. On the following day, you shall offer a goat without blemish as a purgation offering, and the altar shall be purged with it just as it was purged with the bull.
Again, this is very similar to what happens at the beginning of Leviticus when they make the altars and they make the different implements for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle. Similar stuff, you know, purgation offerings, blood, touching the blood to the base. All of this is part of somehow, again, in the ancient world, our people, like other people, saw blood having the ability to purify and to allow for people to be cleansed. Blood had that power of life. I mean, we don't know exactly why. I mean, people have written sociological papers about it, but somehow people feel that somehow the blood of life has that ability to, yeah, somehow the sacrifice of that animal takes away for the sins of something else or makes it so that it's clean for somebody else. But it's was part of the ancient world. It's not part of our world. I mean, it's not part of our world, but it's part of some people's world, I should say. Sacrifices, animal sacrifices aren't that much, but the idea of something or someone dying for us, it's an important part of Christianity. So I'd hate to say that it's gone from our world, because there's a lot of people who see that as a symbol of what Jesus was, which was a final sacrifice. So yeah, we kind of moved away from that. So I think we're on this part.
I think when you have completed the ritual of purging, you shall offer a bull of the herd without blemish and a ram of the flock without blemish. Offer them to God, let the priests throw salt on them, and offer them up as a burnt offering to God. Every day for 7 days you shall present a goat of purgation offering, as well as a bull of the herd and a ram of the flock. You shall present unblemished ones. 7 days they shall purge the altar and purify it. Thus shall it be consecrated. And when these days are over, then from the 8th day onward, the priests shall offer your burnt offerings and your offerings of well-being on the altar, and I will extend my favor to you, declares the sovereign God.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens in Leviticus, which is why we have the Parshat Shmini, which is the 8th day, the day that after a week of sacrificing and cleansing and everything else, that the altar got ruined by Nadav and Avihu and had to be re-purged again after 8 days of basically that everything should have been great, and it all got ruined on opening day. And that was in the story of Nadav and Avihu. We read about Aaron's sons who offered up alien fire, got burned up, and then they had to redo this after the 8th day. Picks back up in Achrei Mot for the death. We read about the cleansing ritual, which becomes our Yom Kippur ritual, which we do every year on the 10th day of that month, Tishrei. So God's tour and the angels' tour, God and angels' tour of Ezekiel, with Ezekiel continues. Again, the angel seems to be speaking with God's voice. It's not God. He kind of says, so you know that he doesn't think that the deity or well, God is not that angel, but it's speaking as if it's God. It's speaking in God's voice in the first person. So this leads to some interesting speculation about how angels work and whether angels, again, are merely projections, different projections of God in this world.
I mean, in Torah, that's pretty consistent where there's confusion whether it's a man, an angel, or God. I mean, the story of Abraham, when they come to him to
Yep.
announce, it starts out like God, and then it ends up being men, then it ends up being angels, and it all gets confused in our mind, but maybe for them, it wasn't confusing at all.
Here why it gets to what complicates it here is that it's clear that the thing that he's talking to is not a human being. So when he describes the guy as a copper, like copper, well, even if it's not copper, if it's like copper, if it's something shiny, this is not a normal looking, this is not something that can be confused as a human being. So now this gets to this issue of, well, what do angels look like? Do angels look like a man? Because they seem to in Genesis look like a person. They didn't know it. Not only that, in the story of Samson and Judges, they don't know it's an angel until the guy jumps on the fire and goes up. I mean, they think he's an angel, but they don't know for sure. So they don't know. I mean, Ronnie's right. We don't know in the Bible sometimes. This thing is clearly not of this world, not a human. We already saw in Ezekiel visions of angels that are not human, that are composite beings, and at least part of them look human. So this is where in Ezekiel, where we first start, this is our first encounters with beings that are angels that are not also human looking. So it's not that it's not somewhat human looking, it's talking to him. It doesn't seem like it's a completely bizarre, necessarily composite beast or entity, but there's something weird going on here. This is not a normal looking, human looking person thing that he's talking to. So this is where people start speculating from Ezekiel text and from other texts that we'll encounter later on in Daniel. That's when we start to talk about beings or divine beings that are not like a person, which we don't get in the Torah itself. We don't get these kinds of things in the Torah. We don't, they look like people. So that's why I'm just pointing it out to you. This is where, when we start to see the stuff in the Apocrypha and later on in Christian scriptures and Christian myth and Jewish myth and Midrash and whatever we want to call it, this is where this stuff starts to develop from, because there's a text for it. There's a place here where there are things that don't look like a person anymore. So it's what it says. So, all right. So this is kind of a weird text here, but let's take a look at it.
And God said to me, this gate is to be kept shut and is not to be opened. Absolutely no one shall enter by it, because the Eternal, the God of Israel, has entered by it. Therefore, it shall remain shut. Only the prince may sit in it and eat bread before God, since he is a prince. He shall enter by way of the vestibule of the gate and shall depart by the same way.
So God goes into a gate, and then no one else is ever supposed to go through that entrance. The prince, and it doesn't say king, that's why they didn't say king, it says nasi, which is, as I told you before, this is the Hebrew word we use today for president of Israel, not prime minister. The prime minister of Israel is called the Rosh HaMemshalah, the head of the government. The nasi is the president. We also use the word nasi for the president of America in Israel. They'll call him a nasi. A nasi is translated as prince. It's biblical, very acceptable way to translate it, but it's something like a king, but not quite a king. And so this, we haven't really encountered a nasi in the Bible to have any functioning, a functioning job other than to be an heir. But this basically says that this person who has this role gets to eat at the gate, but he doesn't get to go through the same way. He gets to go through like the side entrance, goes in the side entrance. But it's not a king. It's not a king.
Then he led me by way of the north gate to the front of the temple. I looked, and lo, the presence of God filled the temple of God, and I fell upon my face. Then God said to me, O mortal, mark well, look closely, and listen carefully to everything that I tell you regarding all the laws of the temple of God and all the instructions regarding it. Note well who may enter the temple and all who must be excluded from the sanctuary.
I want to show you something really strange here, which you probably saw, but in case you didn't see it, the angel is talking to him as God. When he sees the temple, he sees the presence of God and he falls on his face. So what he sees in the kavod, he understands that to be God, the presence of God, some God aspect of God that we see in the world or can be seen in the world. Not usually necessarily, but it's in the temple. When he's talking to God, God says, this is the rule. These are the rules. So he's seeing the presence of God in the temple, but what's speaking to him is still God, but it's almost as if he's speaking to God, seeing God's presence, but speaking to God in another way while he's looking at the presence of God there. That's what it says. I'm not like interpreting that. I'm saying that's what it says. The presence of God, he's looking at the presence of God, speaking to the angel as God. God's words are coming out of the angel's mouth. Whatever. I mean, it says God said to him. So it's not that the presence of God is speaking to him from that place, but from the thing that's been speaking to him the whole time. So that's kind of an interesting thing in a way, that what he's looking at is God, but what he's speaking to is also God, but it's a different aspect of God. I mean, look, that's what he says. He says, I saw the presence of God. And then God said to me, but God's not speaking to him necessarily from the presence. I mean, I don't think he is. And he's telling him, let me tell you about what happens here in this place.
And say to the rebellious house of Israel, thus said the sovereign God, too long, O house of Israel, have you committed all your abominations, admitting aliens, uncircumcised of spirit and uncircumcised of flesh, to be in my sanctuary and profane my very temple when you offer up my food, the fat and the blood. You have broken my covenant with all your abominations.
Yeah. And before you think that this is like a rail against foreigners, that's not what's going to happen. And I promise you, because you'll see it today, that Ezekiel is very welcoming to the stranger. What he's not welcoming to is the people who have the wrong attitude and who are, of course, not worshiping God. They're worshiping abominations. They're worshiping other gods. So that's what his issue is. It's not with foreigners, I promise you. You'll see it today. So this is not railing against people of other races. It's not what it is.
You have not discharged the duties concerning my sacred offerings, but have appointed them to discharge the duties of my sanctuary for you. Thus said the sovereign God, let no alien, uncircumcised in spirit and flesh, enter my sanctuary. No alien whatsoever among the people of Israel.
Yeah. And again, it seems like it's bad against people born in other places. It does say they're uncircumcised in spirit and flesh. It's not just that they're uncircumcised of their bodies, but of their spirit. Like I said, keep in mind, that's not what it says.
But the Levites who forsook me when Israel went astray, straying from me to follow their fetishes, shall suffer their punishment. They shall be servitors in my sanctuary, appointed over the temple gates and performing the chores of my temple. They shall slaughter the burnt offerings and the sacrifices for the people. They shall attend on them and serve them. Because they served the house of Israel in the presence of their fetishes and made them stumble into guilt. Therefore, declares the sovereign God, I have sworn concerning them that they shall suffer their punishment.
All right. So the priests, they're not free of responsibility here either. So understand that I'm well aware that the priests were doing bad stuff. So
Levites and not Kohanim.
so it's interesting. The tribe, right? The tribe as a whole is at least seen by Ezekiel. And remember, Ezekiel is a Kohen, so we've talked about this before. The Kohanim felt that they were the only people allowed to make sacrifices. What the problem, of course, was is the Levites in the Torah are given the role of being able to offer sacrifices, and they're given the responsibility of, even later on, of helping out in the temple. Ezekiel is essentially writing at a time when the Levites are they have, as far as the Kohanim are concerned by this point, there's more than enough Kohanim to take care of everything. They don't need the Levites anymore. And so you're seeing this continuing problem that the Kohanim have with the Levites, but they know they can't take the Levites out. They can't be taken out of everything, because the Torah says that they're supposed to. So, you know, they get to help, but they don't get to make any sacrifices anymore. I mean, they don't get to offer them. Well, let's read.
They shall not approach me to serve me as priests, to come near any of my sacred offerings, the most holy things. They shall bear their shame for the abominations that they committed.
Yeah, they don't get to be Kohanim anymore. I mean, only the Kohanim, only the descendants of Aaron get to be Kohanim now. I mean, this has all been happening all the way up through this time. The Torah, parts of the Torah are written by Levites, parts of the Torah are written by Kohanim. This part is written by Kohanim. Pretty much what we're going to see from now on are the Kohanim basically saying there is no room for Levites to do anything other than clean up our stuff. I don't know what to tell you other than when there are enough descendants of Aaron, there's thousands and thousands of descendants of Aaron by this point. Remember, this right now is 600 years after Aaron lived. There's thousands of Kohanim. They don't need Levites. They really don't. We get to a point where the Kohanim fight amongst themselves because only some Kohanim can be Kohanim. Only the descendants of Tzadok can be Kohanim. So it gets even worse. So
Tzadok was Cohen during like the period of when?
Of King David and Solomon. So he's a descendant of Aaron 300 years, 200 years after Aaron, and then another 400 years after. Now, where we are now, there's thousands of descendants of just him. And the Tzadokim become the ones in charge. And then guess what? Only parts of the Tzadokim get to be in charge. The Hasmonim are one branch, tiny branch of those guys, and they happen to be the ones who, in the story of Hanukkah, are the ones who stand up to the Greeks, and they wind up being the ones in charge. So only their family. So as the families grow, as there's I mentioned this before, the system is not built to handle the amount of people that are part of this now. They can make the temple bigger. They try. They envision this temple being bigger, but making it bigger doesn't accommodate the thousands and thousands of people that have a claim to help out in this. They're like, where's my piece of this? And there was a huge monetary piece of this. So this becomes a big problem. The system that we built was inherently flawed because it was not built to accommodate millions of people. It was built to accommodate people living in the wilderness, maybe a few thousand people that, would inhabit the land of Israel during the time of Joshua, but not for 5 million people, which we think there was by the time of the Second Temple. Some people say there were 8 million Jews by the time of Jesus. If there are 8 million Jews, how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were Kohanim? There's not enough jobs for them. So it's a bad system. It's a weird thing of how, by the way, to get back to Chabad's is already running into this. There's 10 kids for every family. Where are they going to go? The system isn't built. You can't build an endless amount of synagogues. So eventually the system, you have to figure out how you're going to revamp the system. Otherwise, the thing starts internally collapsing, which I think is somewhat happening now in Chabad, is you have a lot of young people who aren't really sure what they're going to do. Not saying that's why they built a tunnel, but why they have time to dig underneath the building. But you could actually be seeing some of this right now. But I mean, it's not going to affect us that much, but it's going to affect other countries, and it's going to affect places where they're trying to figure out how will we accommodate all these kids. Anyways, so the Levites are just getting squeezed out of more stuff. All right.
But the Levitical priests descended from Zadok, who maintained the service of my sanctuary when the people of Israel went astray from me. They shall approach me to minister to me. They shall stand before me to offer me fat and blood, declares the sovereign God. They alone may enter my sanctuary, and they alone shall approach my table to minister to me, and they shall keep my charge. And when they enter the gates of the inner court, they shall wear linen vestments. They shall have nothing woolen upon them when they minister inside the gates of the inner court. They shall have linen turbans on their heads and linen breeches on their loins. They shall not gird themselves with anything that causes sweat. When they go out to the outer court where the people are, they shall remove the vestments in which they minister and shall deposit them in the sacred chambers. They shall put on other garments, lest they make the people consecrated by contact with their vestments.
Yeah, so makes sense. I mean, the priests have to wear special garments. It's interesting that, again, it's supposed to be linen, which would have less sweat qualities. It's not wool and some of the other fabrics that they had in those days. And they're not supposed to be sweating, and they're also not supposed to be wearing those garments outside. They're only allowed to wear them.
So the priests who've been demoted and are supposed to do all the cleaning, they still can't go into this particular area to clean, right?
Correct. Yep. So
we have to have some Sadokians who are cleaners.
Yep. Because they have so many priests.
Wouldn't these clothes get awful bloody, these linen clothes?
Yeah. But assumedly,
they got to do their own washing, I guess.
Some of these, well, it actually talks about washing. It's interesting because probably some of these fabrics, I haven't really tested it, but wool might be harder to get blood out of too than linen. But for them, it's an issue of sweat. It's an issue of the fibers having the ability to maybe also to be cleaned better. But definitely are natural fibers. They're fibers that are from plant rather than animals. I don't know if that's necessarily their issue. That might be our projection on what it is. But the point is that they are considered holy garments, and they're not allowed to walk around in the community with them. Very similar to what priests do today. There's a area where the priests take off their garments when they're in church. They're not allowed to wear them. Certain garments that they have that they use for the. If you've ever taken a tour of a back behind the scenes tour of a church, they'll take you into the vestment area where it says vestments, and that's where they have to change in that area. They're not allowed to go back out into the rest of the church even without having taken out those vestments. So the church still does this.
The Errol Flynn Robin Hood movie got a letter from I think a bishop who was very indignant that the bishop was wearing the wrong vestments. He was wearing an outdoor vestment indoors.
Yeah, people. Yeah, I mean they know what they're supposed to do. Anyways, so a little bit about their personal behavior now.
They shall neither shave their heads nor let their hair go untrimmed. They shall keep their hair trimmed. No priest shall drink wine when he enters the inner court. They shall not marry widows or divorced women of the stock of the house of Israel, but only virgins, or they may marry widows who are widows of priests.
So that, again, protects the line. It makes sure that only priests are being born to these women. So can't have anybody, again, we talked about this before, women who they were not sure whether they're carrying around the seed of other people. They didn't understand necessarily that that seed didn't last forever. So they didn't want to, they wanted to make sure that anybody who is going to have a baby is going to have a baby that's a priest. And so once a woman had sex with somebody who wasn't a priest, there could be some stuff rattling around in there that would make that baby not a priest. They didn't know that it had a very finite lifespan, those spermatozoa.
So priests were allowed to marry.
The only women, and it's interesting, right? It says right here, the only women that they were allowed to marry, and by the way, it doesn't say divorcees, it only says widows, were widows of other priests, because then they never had relations with somebody who wasn't. Let's see what this note is here. Yeah, they basically just said they wrote it and they translated it in that way. Yeah. So that's the way they're going to make sure that it's always genetically, that they're always like that. Also, of course, says that they're not supposed to be beardless or hairless, but they're not supposed to, it's not supposed to be a mess. They're not supposed to be walking around with a big jufro. They're supposed to have, supposed to be trimmed nicely. So not wild, no Rastafarian dreadlocks, but
They can't be Nazarenes then.
that can be Nazarenes, exactly. But again, not shaved either. All right.
They shall declare to my
Oh, wait.
people what is sacred and what is profane, and inform them what is pure and what is impure. In lawsuits too, it is they who shall act as judges. They shall decide them in accordance with my rules. They shall preserve my teachings and my laws regarding all my fixed occasions, and they shall maintain the sanctity of my Sabbaths.
Yeah, and
Yeah, it's different than the Torah requirement.
Yes.
Judges.
So they're
The
taking
priests-
that power away from the kings.
Correct. And then they're also taking power. Well, they're basically saying here that the priests were doing what, and we've mentioned this at our Pirkei Avot class, the rabbis seem to forget that the priests were doing, well, they conveniently forget that the priests were doing what they were doing, which was teaching the people what they're supposed to be doing, preserving the Torah, preserving the laws, preserving and teaching those laws. This is what the priests were supposed to do. They weren't just offering sacrifices. And so, as we mentioned in the Wednesday night class, the rabbis cut out the priests completely, because by the time that the rabbis were teaching, they were in opposition to the priests, to the Sadducees. And so it's almost like they basically say, hey, it says Moses gave the Torah to Joshua, Joshua gave the Torah to the, but it doesn't say Joshua gave the Torah to the priests, is right? It says Joshua gave the Torah, and then to the men of the great assembly, and the men of the great assembly gave it to us. It's almost like they forgot conveniently that it says right here that the priests were doing this for hundreds of years. So the priests were doing this. They were deciding lawsuits. They were judges, which is what the rabbis were doing. So these were things that the priests did. And the rabbis clearly felt, the Pharisees, before they were rabbis, felt that they could do as well. Some of the priests, some of the Prushim, some of the Pharisees were priests, but some of them, a lot of them weren't. So this is what the priests are supposed to do, at least according to Ezekiel. This is, or according to what God says. This isn't Ezekiel saying it, it's God saying it.
Ezekiel says God says it.
Yes, as a priest. But priests are also supposed to do certain things, right? Like this.
A priest shall not defile himself by entering a house where there is a dead person. He shall defile himself only for father or mother, son or daughter, brother or unmarried sister.
So this
After
is
he
the
has
people that
become
he's allowed to go to a funeral of. A Kohen to this day is not supposed to go to funerals unless they are immediate family. And so Kohanim are not supposed to ever be around dead people unless they're immediate family, of course, because you got to be there for your parents, but for a child.
Rabbi,
Yes.
what happens when a Kohen is a rabbi nowadays?
Yeah. So I've mentioned that there are people who are Kohan, Orthodox rabbis, right, who follow this rule. They will go to the chapel, but they will not go to the cemetery. And that's why it's one of the reasons why chapels oftentimes were not on cemetery grounds. It wasn't an issue. Not only wasn't an issue, it was actually easier. The only way that the chapel could actually be in the sanctuary, on the grounds in some cases, were if it was in the entry of the place, like at Eden, it's in the entry of the place. At Mount Sinai, it's at the entry of the place before you even get up. Now, of course, the Tanakh chapel at Mount Sinai, for example, you have to drive up there. But if it's a rabbi who is a Kohen, he can do the funeral service down below in the main chapel, the front chapel at Mount Sinai. I'm talking about the one in Hollywood Hills. They don't have to enter the cemetery. It's tougher in other places. Generally speaking, again, if the priest doesn't have to walk past or didn't have to cross a cemetery ground in order to do that. For example, if you can drive right from the car into the building, some people have said it's okay as well. So there are rabbis who would go up to the Tanakh chapel if they're a priest, and they would say, yeah, but I didn't walk over a cemetery. I didn't walk over a dead person to get there.
So like Shalom would be that way, like that also with where their
Yep.
chapel is.
Yep. So as long as people didn't have to cross over or walk over to get to the chapel, most people would say it's okay. But some people were like, we want to have it where they don't even have to enter into the cemetery grounds. So like in England, I don't think I've ever seen a cemetery in England. And Tracy's rabbi growing up was a Kohen, and so he never went to the burial. They'd have somebody else, the priest or somebody else from the cantor or somebody else who was not a priest would do the levaya, the actual accompanying the body, and the final words, the kaddish and the burial would never be done by the rabbi. Never goes on. So yeah, it's an interesting situation for people who follow that rule to this day. So there is a way for, of course, him to enter into the community after he went to his father or mother's funeral. Here's what happens.
After he has become pure, 7 days shall be counted off for him. And on the day that he re-enters the inner court of the sanctuary to minister in the sanctuary, he shall present his purgation offering, declares the sovereign God. This shall be
do
their
we know-
portion,
I'm
for I
sorry.
am their portion. And no holding shall be given them in Israel, for I am their holding. The grain offerings, purgation offerings, and reparation offerings shall be consumed by them. Everything proscribed in Israel shall be theirs.
Yep. Gail, you were saying something?
Yeah, do we know why they were doing this? Because they were afraid of contagion? That they didn't want the Kohanim
Some people think that that's why, but why are other people allowed to do it? I mean, clearly they saw dead bodies as ways of making somebody impure, right? And so there is a way through disassociation from the community, from going through a period of then you weren't at least contaminated. That seems like there might be a health reason for it, but there also is blood and different things that were used to clear somebody up after coming into contact with death, or tzara when they had the skin disease. But yeah, they definitely saw some types of contamination. There's no question. But there was also a spiritual component to this too, which is important. So the priests.
Why? I don't understand the spiritual, because isn't it a holy thing to take care of the dead, to wash them?
Yeah, but there's a recognition that that being in that space requires, you know, you have to go into a different kind of frame of mind in order to deal with that. And so coming back from that was something that required some kind of cleansing, which is, you know, why we still have wash our hands before we go back into a house after a funeral. I mean, it's a little minor version of that. I'm not saying we're doing exactly that, but we do a little bit of that when we wash our hands. We put that jug of water out in front of the house. We spiritually cleanse ourselves from that. Again, was there a feeling like there was contamination? Yeah, I'm sure there was, but some of this is not, it doesn't make sense from the contamination hygiene standpoint. There's a spiritual component to it too. I'm not saying there's not a health component, but there's also a spiritual component, because it's not that necessarily even that death is evil or bad, or that it's the other side, but that it is a different side. It needs some kind of recognition that you're re-entering the world after death. And that's why we have our Shiva rituals and our Shloshim rituals, and why people have, you know, I think we've forgotten a lot of that stuff, but we probably should incorporate them better. I don't think we have wonderful answers for how to reintegrate after death. I think we have, if we follow traditional Shiva rules, I think we have a little bit of help, but I don't know that we have a really good way of re-entering after death. You know, they say after a Shiva, you're supposed to take a walk around the block, right? Yeah, I did that. I mean, I did it. I didn't really feel anything after the walk around the block. I don't think there's I think we need to have a better reintegration ritual after death. But
You know, that's a good idea. This is interesting to me because I'm sure you know that Sarah works not just with hospice, but with end of life choices for people.
yeah,
There was some kind of ritual to actually, because it's a very difficult thing to come back into life, you know, as clergy, to come back.
yeah, for anybody who, any person who's been administering or taking
Yeah,
care of people. I mean, Mary did it for years as a hospice nurse. There isn't really great reintegration rituals that we have as a community. I'm sure. I mean, you must have had ways of dealing with it so that you were able to do it for a long time. But people probably develop their own rituals and their own ways of you know. I mean,
yeah,
I have a minor ritual. It's not a huge ritual, but I don't know. I don't mind saying this. It's not like I'm freaky about it, but I have a special pair of black shoes that I use for my funerals. I always wear black, or, you know, I'm never wearing a lighter suit. I mean, I know some people do. I don't care. I have a dark suit, and I don't have one suit that I use for funerals. I have one that's not true. I do have one that I use a lot, but I'll wear that suit for other things too. But I have a pair of shoes that I only wear for funerals. So,
yeah.
I don't know. And I always take them off when I come in the house. I mean, like I never walk around the house with my funeral shoes, but it's a minor thing. But I think
Yeah, but
people,
that's a good idea to differentiate, like Havdalah, you know,
yeah,
a separation.
yeah, yep,
Yeah,
yep. But I feel like those shoes I wipe them off a lot because they're covered with earth. You know, I notice, oh, those are my shoes that have dirt on them, because, you know, even though I'm not doing a lot of the digging, but I always do some, and there's always dirt on my shoes. So I know those shoes have dirt. Those are dirty, white, nice shoes, but with dirt on them. Anyways, so we have some rituals, but I don't think we have great rituals. I don't think we've really developed great rituals for people. Even if you don't encounter death as much as a rabbi does, we all, you know, do it, but we don't really have a way of coming back from it.
One thing that's always been a tradition is to wash your hands before you go into a
Yeah.
building.
Yeah, it's one thing that we all do, which is something we do. But yeah, also for major losses, though, to have some way of coming back, you know, reintegrating after that. I'm sure other cultures, you know, non-Western cultures have done a lot better job of figuring that stuff out. I have a feeling that, not that I was just thinking about it, but I'm sure, like, I know nothing about Aboriginal Australian cultures, but I'm sure they have a very profound ritual for coming back after of losing somebody, but we've kind of moved away from that stuff. So, yeah, anyways, so, priests, they get other stuff. So they don't get a land, but they get all my good stuff. Here's the stuff they get.
All the choice first fruits of every kind, and all the gifts of every kind of all your contributions shall go to the priests. You shall further give the first of the yield of your baking to the priest, that a blessing may rest upon your home. Priests shall not eat anything, whether bird or animal, that died or was torn by beasts.
Yeah, that's treif. That's the word treifa, something that was torn. So priests are not allowed to eat that. Well, no one's allowed to eat that. So it's kind of interesting that was said again, but it's talking about the priests especially. So let's take a look at what we're going to get into now, and I'll show you a map in just a second. But Ezekiel, or God just told Ezekiel, priests don't get any land. They don't get any land, but they get all this good stuff. Now we're going to get into the land part. Here we go.
When you allot the land as an inheritance, you shall set aside from the land as a gift sacred to God an area 25,000 cubits long and 10,000 wide. This shall be holy throughout its entire extent.
Now we're going to get into a division of the land. The land when the people come back. And the first division, the first thing that we learn is that the special section for holy stuff is the first thing that's mentioned. I'll show you the map in a second, but just remember, this is a description of how Israel is going to look when the Israelites come back home. Let's look at this. Well, I'll show it to you in a second. I don't want to show it to you yet.
Of this, a square measuring a full 500 by 500 shall be reserved for the sanctuary, and 50 cubits for an open space all around it. Of the aforesaid area, you shall measure off as most holy and destined to include the sanctuary, a space 25,000 long by 10,000 wide. It is a sacred portion of the land. It shall provide space for houses for the priests, the ministrants of the sanctuary who are qualified to minister to God, as well as holy ground for the sanctuary.
So this is a description of of priestly space. And this is exactly what the Vatican did when the church controlled a good chunk of Italy. They took a part that was going to be their area. They had a lot more area at one point. The Lateran states, the areas that the church controlled at one time were immense. They control a little tiny place now called Vatican City, which is their sovereignty. It's a sovereign nation of its own. So it's the smallest sovereign entity in the world, but it is their block, a few blocks of territory. Before I show you the map, though, this is the description just of the priestly part.
Another space, 25,000 long by 10,000 wide, shall be the property of the Levites, the servants of the temple, 20 chambers.
So the Levites get a section in that area too. Remember, they don't have a piece of land up until this point, but now they do.
Alongside the sacred reserve, you shall set aside a space 25,000 long by 5,000 wide as the property of the city. It shall belong to the whole house of Israel.
And that sounds a lot like Washington, D.C., actually. I'm going to show you this now. So let me get this out of the way. So this is the description of a piece of Israel, and part of it is designated for the Levites and the Kohanim. Within that, there is a piece of land where the sanctuary is and where these other quarters are around it. Now, what's interesting about this, as you're about to see, I was kind of holding off so you can see it. This is going to be the description of the rest of the tribes. So within that, right in the middle of the country, is Washington, D.C. This is not the map of Israel today. It was not the map of Israel in the past. But before we get to that, let's just look at this description of this capital, if you will. Let me
She wants to
share,
text.
let me share this part back to that, and I'll go back to the map, I promise.
And to the prince shall belong on both sides of the sacred reserve and the property of the city, and alongside the sacred reserve and the property of the city, on the west, extending westward, and on the east, extending eastward, a portion corresponding to one of the tribal portions that extend from the western border to the eastern border of the land. That shall be his property in Israel, and my princes shall no more defraud my people, but shall leave the rest of the land to the several tribes of the house of Israel.
Yes, which is that this is the only piece of Israel that the king can own. So the king can't own anywhere else. The king
Then
can't
don't have a
decide.
clue how to cope with exponential growth. They don't understand that that exists, and they need to plan for it.
But the problem that, and so what they recognized though, was that before the old system that they had, the kings were owning land all over the place. They were taking
Right.
places all over the country to make their own. The point of this now is that, and again, they're not even called kings, they're called nasis. They're only allowed to live in the sacred area, or in the designated area. They're only allowed to live in the place that they've been designated. So it would be essentially the situation, which we kind of have a version of. The federal government can only own Washington, D.C., and doesn't really get to own anywhere else. Now, of course, that's not the
way
case.
it
That's not the way the federal government works. But we do have a situation where people are saying the federal government shouldn't own places outside of Washington, D.C. But it's that kind of understanding that, wait a second, why is this controlled by the federal government? Now, we would say today that those areas, especially like depending on where you live in the country, we would say, oh, it's really good the federal government maintains those lands so that corporations don't come in and drill oil on those lands. Or we really love Yosemite, so let's make sure that that's a national park. Or let's make sure that such and such a place, wherever, is a national park. So there's certain places where most of us would say, well, we want the federal government to come in and protect that. But we would also say, as a state government, if you're in the state government, I don't want this federal government to own this piece of land. So these issues are still, they still exist. And, they existed in every country where they've ever had a central authority or a king, where a king has owned property outside of his territory, outside of the capital. It becomes something of a resentment. And so
Such a difference between the analogy you drew and what's going on here. Here, we're talking about property owned by individuals, not by the government. You know, the analogy works better for the property that they say belongs to the whole city.
yes, but here's where things jump out. At one point, King David owned his palace, and he had his city in Jerusalem. Within a generation, Solomon has military outposts all around the country, which he maintains for security, national security. But people say, well, why does the king have a piece of, he just came in and eminent domain my property so he could put stables in my back, in my backyard now has the stables of the king.
Saying is that nowadays we have a clear distinction between individual private property and public property. Back then, there wasn't that distinction, you know,
But there was tribal property.
Yeah,
There
yeah,
was tribal property. And understand that he says right here, God says right here, you will not, the kings will, or the royalty will not defraud my people anymore, which means that they were taking advantage of the people. They were literally going into other parts of the country, tribal land, and they were doing it. So it's not exactly, and again, when we say tribal land now, immediately we go to Native Americans, but this is like states' rights. These are literally people saying, this is our state. You don't have a right to take away our property. Now, again, here it's clearly not for national defense. Here the kings had previously, as we read about King Ahab, hey, I like this vineyard. I'm going to kill this guy and take his vineyard. We know from the Bible that they did this. So this is clearly a way to keep the king or keep the authority in one area and not have him go out. What's weird about this, I already showed you the map. This is not, these dimensions or the way that this is large pieces of land. These are large tracts of land. This is not small. We're not talking about small places, but each tribe is going to essentially get this too. So there's a point to this, which is for there to be order, but well, you'll see it. You'll see it in a second. I'll go back to it.
Thus said the sovereign God, enough, princes of Israel. Make an end of lawlessness and rapine, and do what is right and just. Put a stop to your evictions of my people, declares the sovereign God. Have honest balances, an honest ephah and an honest bath.
Yep.
The ephah and the bath shall comprise the same volume, the bath a tenth of an omer and the ephah a tenth of an omer. Their capacity shall be gauged by the omer. And the shekel shall weigh 20 gerahs, 20 shekels, 25 shekels and 10 plus 5 shekels shall count with you as a mina.
And you better have good, honest weights and measures. And it's very clear what these weights and measures are. So you're not going to take advantage of people anymore. You're not going to create, systems that you're able to control, even down to how you're controlling measurements. And these are the contributions of those things. And so it's very clear what people are going to be doing.
This is the contribution you shall make. 1/6 of an ephah from every homer of wheat, and 1/6 of an ephah from every homer of barley, while the dew from the oil being measured by the bat, shall be 1/10 of a bath from every core. As 10 bats make an homer, so 10 bats make a homer.
So there are liquid measurements and there are weight measurements, mass measurements, but there are equivalencies, right? So 10 baths make a homer. So baths are liquid measurements, volume, liquid measurements. And so they can also have a weight, which, at least when it comes to oil.
And the dew from the flock shall be 1 animal from every 200. All these shall be contributed from Israel's products for grain offerings, burnt offerings, and offerings of well-being to make expiation for them, declares the sovereign God.
And these are not the same measurements that they had before. One of the reasons why is because they have a lot more people now. So it's almost as if in Ezekiel, they finally have taken into consideration some of that exponential growth that you talked about, Rosemary. They have taken into consideration now that we have a lot more people, we have a lot more animals, and this is the way we can restructure this. Is it going to make sense when there's 8 million people? No. But it takes into consideration the growth of the people by 500 BCE instead of 1200 BCE.
I remember from the pandemic, one of the things they were saying was that people just don't have a good intuitive understanding of exponential growth. They don't get it still. We still
People
don't
have
get
a
it.
hard time.
We're not wired that way.
Yeah, people can't envision it.
Right.
Yep. We just want to see things double
Yeah.
or
Well, we figure they're double, but we don't get that they're gonna double and double and double and double and double and keep on doubling.
exactly.
In this contribution, the entire population must join with the princes of Israel. But the burnt offerings, the grain offerings, and the libations on festivals, new moons, Sabbaths, all fixed occasions of the house of Israel shall be the obligation of the prince. He shall provide the purgation offerings, the grain offerings, the burnt offerings, and the offerings of well-being to make expiation for the house of Israel. Thus said the sovereign God, on the first day of the first month, you shall take a bull of the herd without blemish, and you shall cleanse the sanctuary. The priest shall take some of the blood of the purgation offering and apply it to the doorposts of the temple, to the four corners of the ledge of the altar, and to the doorposts of the gate of the inner court. You shall do the same on the seventh day of the month to purge the temple from impurity caused by unwitting or ignorant persons. On the 14th day of the first month, you shall have the Passover sacrifice, and during a festival of 7 days, unleavened bread shall be eaten. On that day, the prince shall provide a bull of purgation offering on behalf of himself and of the entire population, and during the 7 days of the festival, he shall provide daily for 7 days 7 bulls and 7 rams without blemish for a burnt offering to God, and 1 goat daily for a purgation offering. He shall provide a grain offering of an ephah for each bull and an ephah for each ram, with a hin of oil to every ephah. So too, during the festival of the 7th month, for 7 days from the 15th day on, he shall provide the same purgation offerings, burnt offerings, grain offerings, and oil.
And the only 2 holidays essentially that are mentioned here are Passover and Sukkot. This is the 7th month festival, 7 days from 15th on. That is Sukkot. Those 2 festivals are mentioned here, nothing else. That doesn't mean anything else was supposed to be done, but that's all the things that they mentioned as far as the temple. And that's the Passover offering. And by this point, the Passover offering is both a sacrifice and unleavened bread. Wasn't quite like that at the beginning. At the very beginning, when we read about it in Leviticus, it seems like it's 2 festivals. Here it's 1 festival. By this point, Passover, 14th day, you both make the sacrifice and you eat unleavened bread for 7 days. So that's that section there. We're going to finish now with the last section, the last part of this, which is not about necessarily the priests, but what happens here for us in the future when this temple would be rebuilt. Let's read it.
Thus said the sovereign God, the gate of this inner court that faces east shall be closed on the 6 working days. It shall be opened on the Sabbath day, and it shall be opened on the day of the new moon. The prince shall enter by way of the vestibule outside the gate, and shall attend at the gatepost, while the priest sacrifice his burnt offering and his offering of well-being. He shall then bow low at the threshold of the gate and depart. The gate, however, shall not be closed until evening. The common people shall worship before God on Sabbaths and new moons at the entrance of the same gate. The burnt offering that the prince presents to God on the Sabbath day shall consist of 6 lambs without blemish and 1 ram without blemish.
So you can see the people worship on Shabbat and the new moon. So clearly the temple is being used every day. It's being used every day. But on Shabbat, on new moons, Rosh Chodesh, people come from all around. Anybody could be doing it.
With a grain offering of an ephah for the ram, a grain offering of as much as he wishes for the lambs, and a hin of oil with every ephah. And on the day of the new moon it shall consist of a bull of the herd without blemish, and 6 lambs and a ram. They shall be without blemish. And he shall provide a grain offering of an ephah for the bull, an ephah for the ram, and as much as he can afford for the lambs, with a hin of oil to every ephah.
And again, Rosh Chodesh, pretty important.
When the prince enters, he shall come in by way of the vestibule of the gate, and he shall go out by the same way. But on the fixed occasions, when the common people come before God, whoever enters by the north gate to bow low shall leave by the south gate, and whoever enters by the south gate shall leave by the north gate. They shall not go back through the gate by which they came in, but shall go out by the opposite one.
So that's an interesting ritual of not going out the same door that you came in through, but it's not on every day. It's on the fixed occasions. It's on those holidays. They're not supposed to go out the same gate that they came in.
As for the prince, he shall enter with them when they enter and leave when they leave. On festivals and fixed occasions, the grain offering shall be an ephah for each bull, an ephah for each ram, and as much as he wishes for the lambs, with a hin of oil for every ephah. The gate that faces east shall also be opened for the prince whenever he offers a free will offering, be it burnt offering or offering of well-being, freely offered to God, so that he may offer his burnt offering or his offering of well-being, just as he does on the Sabbath day. Then he shall leave, and the gate shall be closed after he leaves. Each day you shall offer a lamb of the first year without blemish as a daily burnt offering to God. You shall offer one every morning. And every morning regularly you shall offer a grain offering with it, a sixth of an ephah with a third of a hin of oil to moisten the choice flour as a grain offering to God, a law for all time. The lamb, the grain offering, and oil shall be presented every morning as a regular burnt offering. Thus said the sovereign God, if the prince makes a gift to any of his sons, it shall become the latter's inheritance. It shall pass on to his sons. It is their holding by inheritance. But if he makes a gift from his inheritance to any of his subjects, it shall only belong to the latter until the year of release. Then it shall revert to the prince. His inheritance must by all means pass on to his sons.
And that's an interesting law about the king or the ruler, is that
So
he's
it's
allowed to give things to
entailed.
subjects, but he can't give it away forever. If something is supposed to stay within the royal dominion, it has to go back to the royal dominion. It's not really clear why he would have given something to one of his subjects rather than, maybe he really loves a woman and wants to give something to her dad or something like that. He's not allowed. It can only be for until the year of the Jubilee, which is, again, that's what it's going to say here in the note. This is the year of Leviticus, talks about the year of Jubilee. So a lot of these laws have to do with the priests, with the princes, with the Nasi. And you can see that the prince has to follow the rules that everybody else has. But he also, again, can't take away stuff from his own kids, from his own descendants. But here it says right here,
but the prince shall not take property away from any of the people and rob them of their holdings. Only out of his own holdings shall he endow his sons, in order that none of my people may be dispossessed of their holdings.
yep. So it's very clear that the princes, the royalty has to follow the rules. Now, moving a little way away from the princes, from the political leadership, a little bit back to the priests.
Then the guide led me into the passage at the side of the gate to the sacred chambers of the priests, which face north. And there, at the rear of it, in the west, I saw a space.
And you can see where it says the guide, it goes back to, again, it just says literally he. It's not still God speaking or God's voice, but it's the entity.
He said to me, this is the place where the priests shall boil the reparation offerings and the purgation offerings, and where they shall bake the grain offerings, so as not to take them into the outer court and make the people consecrated. Then he led me on into the outer court and led me past the four corners of the court, and in each corner of the court there was an enclosure.
Yeah, here's the priest's kitchens in each corner, right? Each corner has an enclosure for that. Each one has a kitchen area.
These unroofed enclosures, each 40 cubits long and 30 wide, were in the four corners of the court. The four corner enclosures had the same measurements. On the inside, running around the four of them, there was a row of masonry equipped with hearths under the rows all around. He said to me, "These are the kitchens where the temple servitors shall boil the sacrifices of the people."
Yep. So those are the kitchens. Now, the next part, the last part of this book of Ezekiel, we were going to read now, and this is the mystical, prophetic. This is the level of Ezekiel's prophecies that kind of go back to what we read about in chapter 37, the valley of dry bones. This is the thing that we talked about before, which is this special thing that we call the river of life. The river of life. Let's read about the role that water is going to play in this.
I was led back to the entrance of the temple, and I found that water was issuing from below the platform of the temple, eastward, since the temple faced east, but the water was running out at the south of the altar under the south wall of the temple. And then he led me out by way of the northern gate and led me around to the outside of the outer gate that faces in the direction of the east, and I found that water was gushing from under the south wall. As that figure went on eastward with a measuring line in his hand, he measured off 1,000 cubits and led me across the water. The water was ankle deep.
Okay. Ankle deep. It's not super deep. Get your legs wet here in the temple.
Then he measured off another 1,000 and led me across the water. The water was knee deep. He measured off a further 1,000 and led me across the water. The water was up to the waist.
So as he's taking him further away from the temple, out into the water gets deeper, deeper and deeper. And every 1,000 feet or so he goes, he tells him, he's telling us what's happening. It's getting deeper and deeper. Now the water's up to his waist.
When he measured yet another 1,000, it was a stream I could not cross, for the water had swollen into a stream that could not be crossed except by swimming.
So this is now like a river. This little stream that came out of the temple is now a river. There's no stream in the original temple. On the Temple Mount, it's a mount. It's on the top of a rock. There's no water coming there. This temple has a stream, and the stream becomes a river.
"Do you see, O mortal?" he said to me, and he led me back to the bank of the stream. As I came back, I saw trees in great profusion on both banks of the stream. "This water," he told me, "runs out to the eastern region and flows into the Arabah, and when it comes into the sea of foul waters, the water will become wholesome."
So we've talked about this when we've gone on some of our trips to Israel. The Arava is the Dead Sea region. It's the region of the desert where it looks like you're on another planet. The water that comes out of the temple is going to fill up that area with water that will turn the water of the Dead Sea into a sea of life. This is a mystical meta statement about what is going to happen from where the temple is. When it flows out into the desert, it's going to turn it into a sea of life. An area that has no life is going to become full of life.
Every living creature that swarms will be able to live wherever this stream goes. The fish will be very abundant once these waters have reached there. It will be wholesome, and everything will live wherever this stream goes. Fishermen shall stand beside it all the way from En Gedi to En Eglaim. It shall be a place for drying nets, and the fish will be of various kinds and most plentiful, like the fish of the great sea.
That's the Mediterranean. So that area is going to be filled with life. People will be able to fish in the water. From En Gedi, right? That springs that are at the kind of the northern tip of the Dead Sea, all the way down to the bottom it's going to be like the Mediterranean. That's what's going to happen to that area, that desert area of the Dead Sea. So when we drive through it, people who read the Bible, people who've studied the Bible know this vision of Ezekiel is that one day that area is going to come back to life. It's almost as if we're saying the area that you least ever expected to be full of life will come back to life. That's why it's very much like the Valley of the Dry Bones, that this area will have life again is an idea that in the back of the minds of the modern Israeli, in the back of the mind, and it's relevant because people have talked about, you know, the Dead Sea has gone down in level a lot. The Dead Sea is dried up like 50% of what it was 50 years ago or 40 years ago. It's 50% as full. And so some people have said that Israel is going to fill up the Dead Sea with water from maybe either from the Mediterranean, they call it the Med-Dead Channel, or the Red Dead Channel, where they're going to put water back from the Red Sea. And of course, the worry is that's going to destroy the ecosystem, that's going to destroy the mineral content and the unique situation that goes on at the Dead Sea. But in the back of the minds of the people who say that, everybody knows Ezekiel. And they all know that if we have the technology, and they do have the technology to desalinate the water, which they're already doing in Israel, because most of the water that people drink in Israel now is desalinated water, they actually could do this. So Israelis wonder sometimes whether this would happen. Whether the vision that Ezekiel is being told here by God could actually happen. Could they turn the dead? Now, nobody wants to do that. It's not like nobody's advocating for us to turn the Dead Sea into the Sea of Galilee or the Mediterranean. But it could happen, and people know that it could happen. And they know that this is a possibility. They know that in the back of their minds that the technology exists, that Israel could actually do that. So the fact that this crazy vision, this mystical improbability that Ezekiel is told right now could actually manifest itself is something strange. It's not something that, like, you can't dismiss that and just say, well, it doesn't really matter because we're not going to do it. But we could do it. And that means that the vision that people have been talking about for thousands of years could actually happen. And on another level, to some extent, it has happened because Israel has brought other parts of the desert back to life. And that is happening now.
But its swamps and marshes shall not become wholesome. They will serve to supply salt. All kinds of trees for food will grow up on both banks of the stream. Their leaves will not wither, nor their fruit fail. They will yield new fruit every month because the water for them flows from the temple. Their fruit will serve for food and their leaves for healing.
Which is interesting because it says that they were using leaves for medical purposes, right? Medicinal purposes. By the way, it's almost like Ezekiel is being told, they'll still have salt, don't worry. Like, we'll still figure out a way so that you can get salt. Because
We're
salt
going
is
to transform the sea into fresh water, but don't worry, you're also going to be able to still get salt.
Yes,
from it.
we'll still have that because it's valuable. We need to have salt, right? We need to have that salt. So you still have salt, but there'll be trees and there'll be things that, like, you can't even believe will be there.
Thus said the sovereign God, these shall be the boundaries of the land that you shall allot to the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph shall receive 2 portions, and you shall share the rest equally. As I swore to give it to your fathers, so shall this land fall to you as your heritage.
So we read about this amazing river river of life that's going to flow into the Dead Sea. And now we get back to the map that I was going to show you. I showed you a little bit, but I'm going to show you a little bit more in a second. These are the boundaries of the tribes.
These are the boundaries of the land, as at the northern limit, from the Great Sea by way of Hethlon, Lebo-Hamat, Zadad, Beratah, Sabraim, which lies between the borders of Damascus and the border of Hamat, down to Hazar Hatikon, which is on the border of Haran. Thus the boundary shall run from the sea to Hazar Enon, to the north of the territory of Damascus, with the territory of Hamath to the north of it. That shall be the northern limit. As the eastern limit, a line between Haran and Damascus, and between Gilead and the land of Israel, with the Jordan as a boundary, you shall measure down to the eastern sea. That shall be the eastern limit.
Yeah, so let's just show it to you again, especially right up here. So this is a map that basically says that in the future, this area, including Damascus, is the capital of Syria, is part of Israel. So this whole area right here,
That's
This
in Syria
that's Lebanon.
and Lebanon,
This is
right?
Lebanon right here. From the Sea of Galilee, well, right from about here
Yeah.
to up here. This is all Lebanon. This is all Syria. I mean, Syria goes back further. Syria goes back up to here too. But this is all Syria. So this is, Damascus is obviously the capital of Syria. So these mountains, this is the Lebanon mountains, and this is the anti-Lebanon mountains. These are the mountains that separate Lebanon and Syria, which of course Syria claims that Lebanon never should have been a separate country, which is why they occupied Lebanon for a very long time, because they said it was artificially taken away by France to make a Catholic country, which was true. I mean, to some extent, they're not wrong, but Lebanon was created by the Europeans to give the Maronite Christians an enclave. Unfortunately, there are not enough Maronite Christians anymore to keep it, but that's why this area was Lebanon. So Syria occupied it for a long time. And again, this is Syria up here too. Syria comes around the top of Lebanon as well. So this is the map of Israel. And you can see the tribal portions go like this. They go across the top. And there's Ephraim and Manasseh, the two tribes of Joseph that we just had described. That's what the map looked like during the time of the tribes, right? During the time of David and Solomon and all the way down through the 10 northern tribes were up here. These were the tribes. And then the tribe of Judah and Shimon here in the south, that was the tribes. They don't look like this. These are horizontal borders that don't really match where the tribes were before, because Issachar and Zebulun, and I mean, God was on the other side of the Jordan River. Now they're like this. So the country, this is the map, which is not that differently than the diagram of the map is a little different because, again, here Manasseh, which includes much of Jordan, that's not there. So this area is not necessarily part of the new Israel, but north is, and this part of Syria is. So this is a map that we don't have. This is the map currently of Israel, which is, goes all the way down here to the Red Sea. That's on the map here. There's the Golan Heights, which includes this area right here, but it doesn't go all the way up here. It doesn't go all the way up into Lebanon or all the way over here into Syria. Most of Jordan is not affected by this map, but this map is not a map that the Syrians and the Lebanese would like to see, because that's a map that includes the entire country of Lebanon. So this is Ezekiel's descriptions. And so Ezekiel has the holy portion we read about already, and now we're getting into the rest of the description here of the tribal portions, the way he sees it, which is not the way the tribes were before. This is not a map that we ever had.
The southern limit shall run a line from Tamar to the waters of Merabat Kadesh, along the Wadi of Egypt and the Great Sea. That is the southern limit. And as the western limit, the Great Sea shall be the boundary up to a point opposite Lebo Hamath. That shall be the western limit. This land you shall divide for yourselves among the tribes of Israel. You shall allot it as a heritage for yourself and for the strangers who reside among you, who have begotten children among you. You shall treat them as Israelite citizens. They shall receive allotments along with you among the tribes of Israel. You shall give to strangers an allotment within the tribe where they reside, declares the sovereign God.
And that is what I promised you would see. That the strangers are given an allotment in your people, within your people. This is not, no strangers can live amongst you. No, strangers aren't supposed to offer sacrifices. They're not supposed to be doing stuff in the temple, but they are allowed to live with you. They're treated as citizens like your people. They are given allotments from the tribes. You do not kick them out because they're not Israelite. It is not what it says. What?
To this day.
That's Palestinians can own land anywhere inside of Israel if they're citizens of Israel. They can buy a house anywhere in Israel. So Israel has maintained that for every Palestinian who has Israeli citizenship. And I've said this before, there's no difference between a Palestinian Arab and an Arab and a Israeli.
You want a
Arab.
building permit to enlarge your house, it's going to be hard to get one.
Yeah, but it's hard for anybody to get one in Israel.
it's
It's
harder
not, it's
for
not, it's not
Palestinians.
like they're not giving Palestinians the ability to build within Israel. Within the West Bank and within areas that Israel, again, Israel has allowed it building permits and new construction in Ramallah in places where clearly is Palestinian Authority. But yes, in areas where Israel is still trying to figure out where Jews can live and where Arabs can live in the West Bank, it is not easy. But if you're an Israeli Arab who lives in Israel and wants to build in your house, you have as much of a chance to get a building permit to build in your backyard as you are an Israeli, which means you have to go through the bureaucratic red tape of getting that done. So I want to tell you, Israel allows people to own land there as much as you can own land, because you can't really own the land. You can have a 99-year leasehold on it land, but same for Jews and same for Arabs. There is no land requirement for somebody to be Jewish to have property in it. There's no religious requirements. Is there racism and sometimes discrimination and stuff? Yes. Is it legal? It's not legal in Israel. Is it legal in the United States? No. Does it happen? 100%. But it's not legal. Now, we're going to read the last chapter here, which is the way Ezekiel finishes up. It is not the way you'd like Ezekiel to finish up. You'd like him to wrap it up and be neat and tidy with his things. No, it's almost as if it just finishes up this description of what he sees as being the new dimensions of the tribes. And again, it's not a description that we ever had, but it is a description, and it does figure into the way Israel has divided up its regions. Israel doesn't have states, it does have regions. It has 6 regions, and those regions are somewhat, I wouldn't say based on this, I'm not saying they're based on this, but there are places where this does come into effect. But these are not dimensions of tribal dimensions that we ever had before, and it's not like every one of these tribes is represented in modern Israel today. Okay.
These are the names of the tribes. At the northern end, along the Hetlon Road, from Lebo Hamat to Hazaranan, which is the border of Damascus, with Hamat to the north, from the eastern borders of the sea, Dan, 1 tribe. Adjoining the territory of Dan, from the eastern border to the western border, Asher, 1. Adjoining the territory of Asher, from the eastern border to the western border, Naphtali, 1. Adjoining the territory of Naphtali, from the eastern border to the western border, Manasseh, 1.
So again,
Adjoining
as we said, that's why we get these lines, because all it says is there's this territory, and then there's this territory below it, and then there's this territory below it, and there's this territory below that.
Weren't the 10 northern tribes in the west?
They were gone. They were already gone. They were gone. Yeah, they were gone for 150, 200 years almost by this point. They are gone. They're gone. They're not here.
Anyway.
Yep, we're assuming that they're coming back. Yep.
Adjoining the territory of Manasseh from the eastern border to the western border, Ephraim, 1. Adjoining the territory of Ephraim from the eastern border to the western border, Reuven, 1. Adjoining the territory of Reuben from the eastern border to the western border, Judah, 1. Adjoining the territory of Judah from the eastern border to the western border shall be the reserve that you set aside, 25,000 cubits in breadth and in length, equal to one of the portions from the eastern border to the western border. The sanctuary shall be in the middle of it.
Yeah, and that's this little thing here that we talked about. Below Judah is the holy portion. So remember that thing? That's where it goes, right there, right in the middle, right in the middle.
The reserve that you set aside for God shall be 25,000 long and 10,000 wide. It shall be apportioned to the following. The sacred reserve for the priests shall measure 25,000 cubits on the north, 10,000 on the west, 10,000 on the east, and 25,000 on the south, with God's sanctuary in the middle of it.
Yep,
This
that's the center
consecrated-
of it,
Mhm.
is the temple.
This consecrated area shall be for the priests of the line of Zadok, who kept my charge and did not go astray as the Levites did when the people of Israel went astray. It shall be a special reserve for them out of the total reserve from the land, most holy, adjoining the territory of the Levites.
And again, there he's going on again about the Levites. He's really not going out again about the Levites. He's going out against the whole Kohanim, with the exception of the Tzadokites. It's almost like they're all Levites. Everybody who's not Tzadok is a Levite. So again, this is his own thing. I mean, it's not his own thing. It's the priests by this point were definitively saying we're Tzadokites, and everybody else doesn't really count. They're secondary.
Alongside the territory of the priests, the Levites shall have an area 25,000 long by 10,000 wide. The total length shall be 25,000 and the breadth 10,000. None of it, the choicest of a land, may be sold, exchanged, or transferred. It is sacred to God. The remaining 5,000 in breadth by 25,000 shall be for common use, serving the city for dwellings and pasture. The city itself shall be in the middle of it, and these shall be its measurements. On the north side, 4,500 cubits. On the south side, 4,500. On the east side, 4,500. And on the west side, 4,500. The pasture shall extend 250 cubits to the north of the city, 250 to the south, 250 to the east, and 250 to the west. As for the remaining 10,000 to the east and 10,000 to the west, adjoining alongside of the sacred reserve, the produce of these areas adjoining the sacred reserve shall serve as food for the workers in the city.
This is all about the sacred structure. So you can see the sacred precinct has more lines than all the rest of the tribal portions.
The workers in the city from all the tribes of Israel shall cultivate it. The entire reserve, 25,000 square, you shall set aside as the sacred reserve plus the city property. What remains on either side of the sacred reserve and the city property shall belong to the prince. The prince shall own the land from the border of the 25,000 of a reserve up to the eastern boundary, and from the border of the 25,000 on the west up to the western boundary, corresponding to the tribal portions. The sacred reserve with the temple sanctuary in the middle of it, and the property of the Levites and the city property as well, shall be in the middle of the area belonging to the prince. The rest of the land between the territory of Judah and the territory of Benjamin shall belong to the prince. As for the remaining tribes, from the eastern border to the western border, Benjamin, 1.
So after all that, they get back to the rest of the tribes. Benjamin, Shimon, Issachar, Zebulun. But look at how much description they had about this one section, which is, of course, the section for the priests and for the king, for the Nasi. But that's what their main concern is the sacred area. The description of the other territories is very, very minimal.
Adjoining the territory of Benjamin, from the eastern border to the western border, Shimeon,
Each-
1.
Yeah, Manasseh. So Doreen was just saying Joseph has two. Yep, he has Manasseh and Ephraim. No Joseph, it just says Ephraim and Manasseh. So this is the rest of them. Benjamin and then Shimon.
Adjoining the territory of Shimon from the eastern border to the western border, Issachar, 1.
So again,
Adjoin-
it says from east to west. That's why it's a solid line, because it just says from east to west. that's the section of Shimon. Maybe it's not exactly a line, but the east to west border, that's it. It goes from one border to the other is that next tribe's section. And these are the rest.
Adjoining the territory of Issachar from the eastern border to the western border, Zebulun, 1. Adjoining the territory of Zebulun from the eastern border to the western border, Gad, 1. The other border of Gad shall be the southern boundary. This boundary shall run from Tamar to the waters of Meribah Kadesh to the Wadi of Egypt and to the Great Sea. So
And
they
that
needed
is-
that fancy river because otherwise all these people would be out in the desert with nothing to eat.
Well, correct. And so this area now becomes a water of life. And so for the southern tribes, from the holy portion, you can see if that whole area that's coming off of the water, that river. So when does this exist? Well, I don't know. I don't know. I read some Christian writings, the people who made this beautiful map that I used right here. This is the best map I could find of this description. These were Christians who did this map. So do Christians envision that this is what Israel's going to look like one day when Jesus comes back? Maybe. So this is the description of the land. And again, this is what how Ezekiel finishes.
That is the land that you shall allot as a heritage to the tribes of Israel, and those are their portions, declares the sovereign God. And these are the exits from the city. On its northern side, measuring 4,500 cubits, the gates of the city shall be 3 gates on the north, named for the tribes of Israel, the Reuben gate, 1, the Judah gate, 1, the Levi gate, 1.
And so we're back to the city. He's gone back to the description of the gates of the city. He's not even, it's like we told you the dimensions of the city, of the tribes. This is the way the country is, like, that's a pretty big thing, the way the country is divided, but that's not what Ezekiel is concerned about. Ezekiel's concerned about what this new Jerusalem will look like. And that's why this new Jerusalem is, again, so much a part of our vision of what would happen one day, that this is what we envision. So this is what it is. It's the dimensions and the lines of the city. And this is what it finishes with.
On the eastern side, measuring 4,500 cubits, there shall be 3 gates. The Joseph gate, 1, the Benjamin gate, 1, and the Dan gate, 1. On the southern side, measuring 4,500 cubits, there shall be 3 gates. The Shimeon gate, the Issachar gate, and the Zebulun gate, 1. And on the western side, measuring 4,500 cubits, there shall be 3 gates. The Gad gate, 1, the Asher gate, 1, the Naphtali gate, 1. Its circumference shall be 18,000 cubits, and the name of the city from that day on shall be God is there.
That's the end. Now you think, well, that's a weird way to end this prophecy. Now again, it means that Jerusalem has a new name. Adonai Shama, God is there. Jerusalem is called Adonai Shama, God is there. So it has a new name. I mean, according to this. So it finishes with this description of this new Jerusalem. We say, Tam v'neshalem tehillah le'el borei olam. We give thanks to God, the creator and sustainer of everything. But this book Ezekiel, which is the longest of the prophetic books as far as the number of words, is filled with some very interesting descriptions of God, of the heavenly chariot, if you will, of God's presence, of the valley of the dry bones, and then of Jerusalem and the land of Israel itself. It's a really interesting thing to think about today, because as Israel is fighting for its territorial integrity and for its what it looks like, we believe that the country is essentially, there's a vision of this country where it says God is there. I will point out that we definitely live in a difficult time, and it's difficult sometimes to imagine any version of Israel which is going to be at peace. But Ezekiel does, and I would say that, in all seriousness, that the Christian communities that today envision Israel being a place of peace and a place where where, Israel could, be safe and be whole. I just want to finish with something that I posted a couple days ago, and I just want to share it now because in honor of MLK, I posted this a couple days ago so people could read it over the weekend. There's a picture of MLK with Rabbi Heschel, and I'm not sure which rabbi is holding that Torah there, but 2 weeks before he was assassinated, he went to JTS in New York and had they had a discussion with Rabbi Heschel, who was one of the teachers at JTS. And this was March 26th, right? So this was 2 weeks before he was assassinated. It was a recorded conversation. They talked about a lot of different stuff. There's a famous quote attributed to Martin Luther King where he said, somebody confronted him with the comment that they were anti-Zionist, not anti-Semitic. And he said, that's rubbish. He says, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Because he didn't say that in a recorded situation, people discount that it happened. I believe that he said it, and Jews have quoted it. Israeli leaders have quoted it for a long time. I'd rather not get into that argument because I don't have proof. I've looked at it up. I've looked it up. I've looked at the different sources on it. We don't really know whether he said it for sure. I believe he said it. It's been corroborated. He said it at Harvard in Boston, but we don't have it recorded. This statement was recorded. It's on video or on film. He said it, and he said it on March 26, 1968. Peace for Israel means security, and we must stand with all of our might to protect its right to exist, its territorial integrity. I see Israel, and I don't mind saying it, as one of the great outposts of democracy in the world, and a marvelous example of what can be done, how desert land can be transformed into an oasis of brotherhood and democracy. That's what that river of life was going to do. Peace for Israel means security, and that security must be a reality. And that's what he said. Those were his definitive words. And I point that out because, again, we just read in Ezekiel, this vision of the river of life transforming the desert, which is what I think he was referring to some extent. But notice when he said this in 1968, nearly a year after the 67 war. He didn't say without the West Bank. He didn't say all of the things that some of his followers have said. That's what he said. He did not say with land being returned. He didn't say with a territory of whatever. He said it in 1968. So I want to point that out. This was one of the last things that he said publicly about anything. And he talked about the importance for Israel's existence and Israel's territorial security. So I don't know what to say to the people who deny that, that this is part of a historical reality, but that's what happened. That's not where we're at today. And of course, that's something that I hope we could get back to at some point, but it's important to remind people. I will tell you that I tried to remind people of this. And just so you know, I'm going to show you this because you should know that this is the kind of stuff that I have to deal with on a regular basis. I tried to boost that post with Facebook, and they denied my ability to boost that post. So I actually wanted to pay to have that post out there so that people could read it.
So we put it on our page.
You can share it. You can share it, but this is what Facebook said to me when I tried to boost it. I asked them first to do it. They refused it. And then I asked for a review, and it says, after an additional review, it has been determined that it does not comply with our advertising policies. Why? I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know why they can approve ads for other stuff, but they they couldn't approve this ad. They denied it. So, political, I don't know. All I did was quote MLK, but that's what I deal with regularly from Facebook. Nonsensical, nonsensical stuff. So share it out. Let people know that that's. And I don't know, man. I look at that and I just wonder what it's on. It's on our temple one too. The only reason I didn't show the temple one is because here, I'll show the temple one, is because it will get into a loop of us watching ourselves on Facebook. Because right now that's us on Facebook. And this is the post that I had on Facebook. It's also on my personal, post too.
Thanks, Rob.
All right, everybody. Thank you, Rosemary, for getting us through the end of Ezekiel. Thank you,
Mark.
everybody, for being here. Next week, we'll come back and we'll be reading our next prophet, the prophet Hosea, who is an interesting prophet who lived an interesting life. It's much, much shorter than Ezekiel. All the rest of the prophets added up are shorter than Ezekiel. Every other prophet that we have in the Bible, the next 12 prophets, they don't equal the length of Ezekiel. So it's quite a lot of different prophets that we're going to meet in the coming weeks. And again, thank you everybody for being here and welcome back. Welcome back to Tuesday morning. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
No. Anyways, sorry.
I have a question.